On October 26, 1942, during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, USS Hornet met her match.
17,000 feet beneath the waves, in a stretch of the Pacific Ocean where sunlight never reaches, an underwater drone made a discovery that stunned the world. For nearly 8 decades, the USS Hornet, one of America's most storied aircraft carriers, had vanished without a trace. Its exact resting place remained a mystery, buried in wartime legends and oceanic darkness. But when the drone's floodlights cut through the deep, what appeared on the screen was more than a wreck. It was a perfectly preserved time capsule of World War II. Join us as we walk through the discovery of the USS Hornet. The legend of the USS Hornet. The USS Hornet was more than steel and rivets. She was a symbol, commissioned in October 1941, just weeks before Pearl Harbor threw America into the firestorm of World War II. From the moment she entered service, the Hornet was destined for history. In April 1942, barely 6 months into her career, the Hornet embarked on one of the most daring missions of the war, the Doolittle Raid. 16 B-25 bombers, aircraft never meant to fly from a carrier deck, launched from her flight deck to strike Tokyo. The planes were too large, too heavy. The mission was borderline suicidal. But Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle and his crews didn't flinch. They roared down the Hornet's deck, engines screaming, and disappeared into the western sky. It was a suicide mission wrapped in propaganda gold, a message to Japan that nowhere was safe, and a desperately needed morale boost for a reeling America. The Hornet delivered those planes knowing they'd never return to her. Most of the crews crash-landed in China or were captured by Japanese forces. Some died. But the mission succeeded. The impossible had been done. Tokyo had been bombed. The myth of Japanese invincibility had been shattered. The Hornet became an instant legend. 1 month later, she was at Midway, the battle that turned the tide of the Pacific War. While her torpedo squadrons suffered catastrophic losses, flying into walls of Japanese anti-aircraft fire with outdated aircraft and faulty torpedoes, her dive bombers helped sink Japanese carriers and cement American naval dominance. The Hornet was there, in the thick of it, trading blows with an empire. Her crew was young. Many were teenagers, fresh from farms and factory towns, thrust into a war they barely understood. They worked 18-hour shifts in sweltering engine rooms, on exposed gun platforms, in cramped ready rooms waiting for the call to launch. They wrote letters home they weren't sure would ever be delivered. They sang, they joked, they fought fear with camaraderie, and they believed in their ship. But glory came at a cost. Sailors called her a lucky ship, until the luck ran out. By the fall of 1942, she had fought in nearly every major engagement in the Pacific. Her crew was exhausted. Her hull bore scars from near misses and shrapnel, paint peeled, rivets strained. The ship that had once gleamed with newness now looked weathered, tired, like a boxer who'd gone too many rounds. And whispers began. Some said she was haunted, cursed by the ghosts of those who never came home. Men reported hearing footsteps in empty passageways, voices in the dark, the phantom hum of engines that had been shut down hours before. Superstition or not, the men who served aboard her felt it, a weight in the steel, a presence in the passageways. The Hornet had seen too much death, absorbed too much violence. She carried it with her. The ship's name carried its own mythology. In naval tradition, a Hornet is relentless, aggressive, unforgiving. It doesn't retreat. It doesn't hesitate. It strikes again and again until the threat is eliminated or it dies trying. The Hornet lived up to it. But even Hornets can be swatted from the sky. By late October 1942, the Japanese knew her name. They knew what she'd done, and they wanted her dead. The Hornet was no longer just another carrier. She was a target, a symbol that needed to be destroyed. The Japanese fleet was hunting her, and this time, there would be no escape. By late October 1942, the Hornet was facing odds no carrier could survive. The doom of the Hornet. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands was a bloodbath. On October 26, 1942, American and Japanese carrier groups clashed northeast of Guadalcanal in a desperate struggle for control of the Solomon Islands. It was a knife fight at sea, brutal, chaotic, and unforgiving. Both sides knew what was at stake. Whoever controlled the Solomon Islands controlled the Pacific. There would be no retreat, no second chances. This was total war. The Hornet launched her aircraft at dawn, sending wave after wave toward the Japanese fleet. Pilots climbed into their cockpits knowing many wouldn't return. They took off into the gray morning sky, engines roaring, propellers biting into the wind. But the enemy was already airborne, and they were coming for her. The first wave hit at 9:12 a.m. Japanese dive bombers screamed down through anti-aircraft fire, their bombs tearing through the flight deck like hammer blows. The first bomb penetrated deep into the ship, detonating in the forward elevator pit and sending a shockwave through the entire vessel. Another struck near the island superstructure, killing officers and gunners where they stood. Men were thrown from their feet. Fires erupted instantly, fed by aviation fuel and ammunition. Then came the torpedo planes, low and fast, skimming just above the waves. Anti-aircraft gunners fired desperately, tracers lighting up the sky, but the Japanese pilots pressed through the curtain of steel. 2 torpedoes slammed into the Hornet's starboard side, punching massive holes below the waterline. Engine rooms flooded, the lights went out, power died. The ship shuddered and listed hard to starboard. And then came something no one had prepared for. A damaged Japanese dive bomber trailing smoke and fire didn't pull up. Its pilot, wounded or dead, aimed his dying aircraft directly at the Hornet's deck. The plane plowed into the signal bridge in a massive fireball, exploding on impact. Fuel sprayed across the superstructure. Men were incinerated instantly. Minutes later, another crippled plane did the same, crashing near the forward elevator and adding more fuel to the inferno. Hornet's decks were on fire. Her engines were dead, yet the crew refused to abandon her. Damage control teams fought through smoke and flame, hauling hoses, shoring bulkheads, dragging wounded to safety. The air was thick with the smell of burning oil, cordite, and charred flesh. Men worked barefoot on red-hot steel, their hands blistered and bleeding. The ship listed so badly that walking required holding onto railings. Water poured into compartments faster than pumps could remove it, but still they fought. The destroyer USS Mustin came alongside to fight fires and evacuate wounded. Tugboats tried to take her in tow, struggling against the dead weight of a 200,000-ton carrier with no power. For hours, they fought to save her. Slowly, agonizingly, the fires were brought under control. For a brief moment, it seemed the Hornet might survive, but the Japanese weren't finished. A second strike arrived in the early afternoon. More bombers, more torpedoes. Lookouts spotted them coming and shouted warnings, but there was nowhere to run. A bomb detonated in the hangar deck, triggering secondary explosions among parked aircraft. Gasoline and ammunition cooked off in chain reactions. Another torpedo struck the port side, nearly breaking her keel. The Hornet groaned, her spine fracturing under the strain. The ship was dying, and everyone knew it. At 5:27 p.m., Captain Charles Mason gave the order no captain ever wants to give. Abandon ship. Others leapt from the deck, trusting the destroyers would pick them up. They left behind shipmates entombed below, men already dead or too injured to move. The Hornet, ablaze from bow to stern, drifted alone in the gathering darkness, a funeral pyre on the Pacific. But she refused to sink. American destroyers, USS Mustin and USS Anderson, opened fire with torpedoes and 5-inch guns, trying to scuttle her before the Japanese could capture or reclaim her. 9 torpedoes were launched. More than 400 shells slammed into her hull. Explosions ripped through her interior. Still, she floated, stubborn, defiant, unwilling to go quietly. As night fell and Japanese destroyers approached, the Americans had no choice. They withdrew, leaving the Hornet to her fate. At dawn on October 27th, Japanese destroyers found her, still afloat, still burning. They fired 4 more torpedoes into her battered hull. Finally, reluctantly, the USS Hornet slipped beneath the waves, taking 140 souls and countless untold stories with her. The 77-year mystery. The coordinates recorded in American and Japanese logs were approximate at best. Wartime navigation relied on dead reckoning, celestial sightings, and guesswork. The chaos of battle made precision impossible. Ships scattered, records conflicted. When the smoke cleared and the fleets withdrew, no one knew exactly where the Hornet had gone down. For decades, she remained lost. Naval historians debated her final resting place. Veterans who survived the sinking offered conflicting memories: adrenaline, trauma, and the fog of war had blurred the details. Some recalled drifting for hours before rescue. Others believed the ship had capsized and broken apart before sinking. The Pacific Ocean, vast and indifferent, kept it secret. Failed expeditions came and went. In the 1990s and early 2000s, advances in sonar and deep-sea exploration technology made it theoretically possible to find her, but the search area was enormous. Thousands of square miles of open ocean, much of it lying above deep-sea trenches that plunged 17,000 feet. At those depths, pressure is crushing, visibility is near zero, and the seabed is a featureless abyss of silt and volcanic rock. Even with modern tools, finding a single shipwreck in such conditions was like finding a needle in a dark, submerged haystack the size of Rhode Island. Sonar could only scan small swaths at a time. The weather windows were narrow, funding was limited. Early attempts barely scratched the surface of the search area before running out of time and money. Theories multiplied. Some believed the Hornet had drifted far from her last reported position, carried by currents as she took on water. Her death throes had lasted hours, plenty of time to move miles from where she was last seen. Others speculated that she had broken apart on the way down, her weakened keel snapping under pressure, scattering debris across miles of ocean floor. A few armchair historians insisted she'd been salvaged secretly by the Japanese or sunk in an entirely different location altogether. The mystery became legend. The Hornet joined the ranks of ghost ships, vessels swallowed by the sea, remembered in stories but lost to reality. She existed in photographs, in declassified reports, in the fading memories of old men. But where her physical remains lay, no one could say. For historians, it was a frustrating gap in the record. For the Navy, it was an unsolved puzzle. But for the families of the 140 men who died with her, it was something far more painful. They carried the weight of not knowing. There were no graves to visit, no markers to place flowers beside, just an empty space in the Pacific, somewhere out there, holding their loved ones forever. Sons who never came home, brothers who disappeared into the dark water, fathers whose final resting place was a question mark on a map. Some families held memorial services at sea, scattering ashes over the approximate area where the Hornet was believed to have sunk. Others simply waited, hoping that one day someone would find her, that one day they would know. Then, in 2019, a billionaire-funded exploration team decided to look again, using technology never before used at such depths. This time, they had autonomous underwater vehicles that could dive deeper and scan faster than anything previously available. They had computer modeling, artificial intelligence, and vast resources. They had time, patience, and determination. The question wasn't whether the Hornet could be found. It was whether she still existed to be found at all. The discovery. Paul Allen didn't set out to become a shipwreck hunter. The Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist had a passion for history, particularly World War II naval history. In 2016, he funded the creation of the RV Petrel, a research vessel equipped with cutting-edge technology designed for one purpose: finding lost warships. The Petrel was no ordinary ship. It carried an autonomous underwater vehicle, AUV, capable of diving to depths exceeding 20,000 feet, far beyond the reach of traditional manned submersibles. The AUV was equipped with high-resolution sonar, 4K cameras, and precision navigation systems that could map the seabed in extraordinary detail. If the Hornet was down there, the Petrel could find her. But first, they had to know where to look. The research team spent months analyzing archival records, cross-referencing American and Japanese battle reports, and consulting with naval historians. They studied ocean currents, examined survivor testimonies, and used computer models to estimate drift patterns. They pored over deck logs, war diaries, and post-battle assessments. Every scrap of information mattered: a sailor's recollection of how long he floated before rescue, a destroyer captain's estimate of distance, a Japanese pilot's report of where he last saw the burning carrier. Slowly, painstakingly, they narrowed the search area to a 10-mile radius northeast of the Solomon Islands, still a daunting expanse, but manageable. It was the best guess anyone had made in 77 years. In late January 2019, the Petrel arrived at the station. The ocean was calm, the sky overcast. Below, more than 3 miles of water separated the ship from the seabed. The crew gathered on deck as the AUV was lowered over the side, its bright yellow hull disappearing into the blue-green water. Then it was gone, descending into the abyss. At 17,000 feet, there is no light. The weight of the ocean presses down with nearly 4 tons of force per square inch. The temperature hovers just above freezing. It is a world of total silence, total darkness, a place where human presence is an intrusion, where the concept of up and down becomes meaningless in the endless black. For days, the AUV crisscrossed the seabed, its sonar painting ghostly images of the ocean floor, volcanic rock, sediment plains, the occasional outcrop, nothing man-made. The crew watched the monitors in shifts, eyes straining for anomalies, hoping, waiting. Hours turned into days. The search grid was methodical, relentless, mind-numbing. Then on the morning of February 3rd, the sonar caught something, a shape, too straight to be natural, too large to be debris. The AUV adjusted course, homing in. The sonar image sharpened, a long angular structure rising from the silt. The profile was unmistakable, a ship. The crew called others to the control room. Voices dropped to whispers. The drone descended closer, its floodlights switched on, cutting through the darkness like twin lances. And there, emerging from 77 years of obscurity, was the USS Hornet. The reaction in the control room was electric. Some crew members gasped, others stood frozen, staring at the monitors in disbelief. A few wiped tears from their eyes. They had done it, against all odds. In an ocean covering 64 million square miles, they had found her. The ship's name, Hornet, was faint but unmistakable, still visible on the hull despite decades of corrosion and marine growth. The letters were ghostly, partially obscured by sediment and rust, but they were there. Proof, confirmation. The lost carrier had been found. The wreck was remarkably intact. The flight deck, though scarred and buckled from bomb hits, was still recognizable. The island superstructure stood upright, its bridge windows dark and empty, staring into the void. Aircraft still sat on the hangar deck, their wings folded as if waiting for takeoff, their landing gear down, frozen in time. The ship's guns were still in their mounts, trained on an enemy that no longer existed. She had gone down hard, but she had gone down whole. The Hornet hadn't disintegrated. She had settled onto the seabed like a tomb, preserving a moment in history that should have been lost forever. The drone circled slowly, methodically. Every pass revealed new details: bomb craters, torpedo damage, scorch marks from fires that had raged 77 years ago. The forward elevator collapsed into the hangar bay. The twisted metal of the flight deck peeled back like torn paper. But there was also a strange dignity to the wreck. Despite the violence she had endured, despite the battering and the fire and the deliberate attempts to sink her, the Hornet still looked like a warship. She still looked proud. The crew aboard the Petrel worked through the day and into the night, documenting every inch of the wreck. High-resolution video, photogrammetry, detailed mapping. They treated the site with reverence, never touching, never disturbing, only observing. When the footage was released to the public, the world saw what the crew had seen: a ghost rising from the deep, a legend made real, a ship that had refused to be forgotten. What they found. The drone circled the wreck slowly, methodically, documenting every detail. What it revealed was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. The damage was catastrophic. Bomb craters pockmarked the flight deck, their edges peeled back like torn paper. The forward elevator, where one of the first bombs had struck, was collapsed into the hangar bay below, its massive steel platform twisted and buckled. Scorch marks radiated from impact sites, black streaks spreading across the deck like frozen shadows, evidence of the fires that had consumed the ship. The starboard side, where torpedoes had struck, bore massive gashes, wounds deep enough to flood entire compartments in seconds. The island superstructure, though still standing, was heavily damaged. The signal bridge where the first kamikaze had crashed was blackened and collapsed. Windows were blown out, railings were bent, yet the structure itself remained upright, defiant, like a sentry still standing watch. But it was the smaller details that stunned the researchers. Aircraft, Grumman F-4F Wildcats and Douglas SBD Dauntlesses, remained in the hangar deck, their landing gear folded, their propellers still. Some still carried ordnance, bombs that had never been dropped, torpedoes that had never been launched. These planes had been ready to fight, fueled and armed, waiting for a mission that never came. Their paint was gone, stripped away by time and pressure, but their shapes were unmistakable, ghostly silhouettes of American naval aviation frozen mid-war. One aircraft sat near the hangar entrance, its nose pointing toward the sea as if ready to taxi to the flight deck. Another was parked near the aft elevator, wings folded neatly, cockpit canopy still in place. The sight was surreal, a snapshot of operational readiness interrupted by catastrophe and preserved by depth. The ship's helm was intact, the wheel frozen in place, still turned slightly to starboard, perhaps the last course correction before power was lost. Navigation instruments, though corroded and covered in sediment, were still mounted in the bridge. Brass fixtures had turned green, dials were unreadable, but the arrangement was clear. This was where men had stood, making life and death decisions as their ship burned around them. The nameplate, a brass plaque bearing the ship's name and commissioning date, was found near the superstructure, partially buried in silt. It was small, unassuming, but deeply symbolic. A simple piece of metal that had once declared the ship's identity to the world, now resting in silence at the bottom of the ocean. Personal items, too, had survived. A boot, its leather preserved by the cold and oxygen-poor environment. A coffee mug still sitting on a shelf in what appeared to be an officer's quarters. Fragments of uniforms, buttons, insignia, a belt buckle. These were not artifacts in the archaeological sense. They were relics, remnants of lives interrupted. Each one represented a man who had lived, worked, and possibly died aboard this ship. The cold, oxygen-poor environment at such depths had preserved them in ways that shallow wrecks never could. There was no wood-boring marine life at 17,000 feet, no strong currents to scatter debris, no sunlight to accelerate decay. The Hornet had become a time capsule, sealed by depth and darkness, holding fragments of 1942 in near-perfect stasis. But there were no human remains. The sea does not preserve flesh, even in the deep. If any of the 140 men who died with the ship had gone down with her, they were long gone, returned to the ocean, dissolved into the sediment, becoming part of the endless cycle of the sea. Only their possessions remained, silent witnesses to their presence. Still, their presence was undeniable. Every bulkhead, every hatch, every scarred inch of steel bore witness to their courage. The gun mounts where men had stood, firing desperately at incoming aircraft. The damage control stations where crews had fought to save their ship. The ready rooms where pilots had waited for the call to launch, knowing many wouldn't return. Historians reviewing the footage were visibly moved. Dr. Robert Nayland, head of the Naval History and Heritage Command's Underwater Archaeology Branch, called it a battlefield frozen in time. He noted that the wreck's condition allowed researchers to verify historical accounts with unprecedented accuracy. The damage pattern matched Japanese attack reports. The position of aircraft confirmed evacuation timelines. Even small details, the angle of the list, the location of debris, told stories that had been lost to history. Naval experts pointed out details that only trained eyes could catch, the way certain hatches were dogged shut, suggesting compartments had been sealed during damage control efforts. The position of fire hoses, still connected to their stations, the deployment of life rafts, some still in their racks, others missing, evidence of the chaotic evacuation. Surviving crew members and their families watched the footage with tears. For them, the Hornet was more than a ship. It was the spirit of a generation. Men who had served aboard her, now in their 90s, saw their youth reflected in the wreck. They remembered shipmates who never came home, faces they hadn't thought of in decades, voices they could still hear if they closed their eyes. One veteran, Robert Hale, who had served as a gunner's mate, watched the footage from his home in California. When asked for his reaction, he paused for a long moment, then said simply, "She was a good ship. She deserved better than what happened to her, but she fought to the end. That's all you can ask." The Hornet had been found, but more than that, she had been witnessed. Her story, written in twisted steel and silent machinery, could finally be told. Meaning of the discovery. The discovery of the USS Hornet was more than an archaeological triumph. It was an act of remembrance, For historians, the wreck confirmed details that had been debated for decades. The location matched revised estimates based on survivor accounts and drift calculations, finally putting to rest conflicting theories about where the ship had gone down. The damage pattern corroborated Japanese and American after-action reports, resolving discrepancies in the historical record that had puzzled researchers for years. The condition of the aircraft and ordnance suggested that the ship had been abandoned in haste, under fire, with no time for a proper evacuation or securing of equipment. Small details mattered immensely. The way certain compartments were sealed indicated disciplined damage control efforts even in the final hours. The position of defensive guns showed they had been manned until the very end. Every observation added another piece to the puzzle, painting a clearer picture of the Hornet's last day than any written account ever could. For families of the lost, the discovery brought a measure of closure. Descendants of the 140 men who died with the Hornet had spent lifetimes wondering where their loved ones had fallen. Now they knew. The coordinates were no longer a question mark. The ship was no longer lost. It existed in a specific place, at a specific depth, resting on a specific patch of seabed. That certainty, however painful, was a gift. Memorial services were held. Families traveled to the site aboard naval vessels, scattering flowers and ashes over the waters above the wreck. Some held photographs of grandfathers and great-uncles they had never met, men who existed only in fading pictures and second-hand stories. Now they had a place to mourn, a location to anchor their grief. But the discovery also raised profound ethical questions. Should war graves be disturbed? The Hornet, like all sunken warships, is protected under international law as a military gravesite. The Sunken Military Craft Act and international agreements designate such wrecks as sovereign territory of their home nations. Disturbing or salvaging artifacts from these sites is prohibited without explicit permission. The RV Petrel's mission was strictly observational. No artifacts were removed. No structures were disturbed. The wreck was documented, honored, and left in peace. Yet some argued that even filming the wreck was intrusive. For them, the dead should rest undisturbed, their final resting place left in silence and darkness. To shine lights on a grave, to broadcast images of a tomb to the world, felt to some like a violation, no matter how respectful the intent. Others countered that documentation is a form of respect, that remembering the fallen, telling their stories, and preserving their legacy is the highest honor we can offer. Without the footage, the Hornet would remain an abstraction, a name in a history book. With it, she becomes real. Future generations can see what these men fought aboard, understand the conditions they endured, and appreciate the sacrifice they made. The debate reflects a larger tension in modern archaeology and military history. How do we balance the desire to learn from the past with the duty to respect those who lived it? Technology has made it possible to reach shipwrecks that were once beyond human grasp. Autonomous drones, advanced sonar, and AI-assisted mapping have turned the deep sea from an impenetrable mystery into an accessible archive. But with that access comes responsibility. Each wreck is not just a historical artifact. It is a tomb, a memorial, a sacred space. The Hornet's discovery reminds us that courage doesn't sink, it endures. The ship that launched the Doolittle raid, fought at Midway, and refused to die at Santa Cruz still serves, even now. She is a testament to the men who built her, sailed her, fought on her, and died with her. She is a bridge between past and present, a tangible link to a war that shaped the modern world. Her story is not just about what happened in 1942. It's about what we choose to remember in 2019 and beyond. It's about the debts we owe to those who came before us, and the responsibility we have to ensure their sacrifices are not forgotten. Even at 17,000 feet below, the Hornet still reminds us that some things are worth finding, and some stories are worth telling, no matter how deep they're buried.